Good evening, everyone, and welcome back to Paranoid Stories. Before we start, make sure to like and subscribe to the channel and leave a comment with where you're from and what time you're watching. So YouTube will keep showing you stories like this. Now let's begin. I spent 23 years as a police dispatcher before I took early retirement, and I figured the Park Service gig would be easy money. Overnight radio watch in a fire tower, monitoring emergency frequencies for hikers in trouble. Quiet, simple. I was wrong about that. The tower sits above Cascade Canyon, about 40 miles from the nearest town. It's a 12 by 12 room at the top of 70 feet of steel stairs, all windows and radio equipment. During fire season, someone needs to be up there every night, and since I'd handled dispatch work for 2 decades, they figured I was perfect for it. First 2 weeks were exactly what I expected. Dead air, occasional check-ins from ranger patrols, nothing that required more than logging a timestamp. The calls started on a Tuesday night in late August. I was 3 hours into my shift when the radio crackled. The voice came through on the emergency frequency, which already felt wrong because that channel was for rangers and search and rescue only. Hikers didn't have access to it. Gregory Shaw, Tower 7, do you copy? My first thought was that one of the rangers was messing with me, but the voice was unfamiliar, male, calm, with this strange flatness to it. No static, no distortion. Crystal clear. "This is Tower 7, I said. "Identify yourself and state your location." "Location marker J47. I'm approximately 200 yards from the base of your tower. I need to report something." J47 was a trail marker near the canyon rim, close enough that I should have been able to see headlamp beams if someone was actually out there. I looked out the north-facing window. Nothing but darkness and the silhouette of pine trees against the stars. "What's the nature of your emergency?" "There are shadows moving around the exterior of the tower. 3 of them. They're not casting right. The angles don't match the light sources." I felt my jaw tighten. I didn't like how he'd used my full name, and I didn't like the casual specificity of his observation. "Sir, I'm looking out the window right now and I don't see anyone. Are you in distress?" "No distress. Just thought you should know what's happening around you." Then the line went dead. I logged it as a prank call, but something about it stuck with me. The way he'd said my name, the precise location marker. I radioed the ranger station to request a patrol check of the J47 area, knowing it was probably pointless. Ranger Kellerman called back 20 minutes later. "Tower 7, we checked the marker. No one out there. No fresh tracks either." I thanked him and tried to settle back into my shift, but I kept looking at the north window, watching for movement that never came. The second call came 3 nights later. Same voice, same frequency. "Gregory Shaw, Tower 7, do you copy?" This time I didn't bother with protocol. "Who is this?" "Location marker J47. I'm seeing those shadows again. They're closer to the stairs now. 4 of them this time. I'm going to ask you one more time to identify yourself, or I'm logging this as harassment and notifying law enforcement. You're sitting in the northwest corner right now. The orange mug with the chipped handle is on your left. You've got the logbook open to page 47. My blood went cold. The mug was exactly where he said it was. The logbook was open to that page. I stood up fast enough that my chair scraped against the floor, and I moved to the center of the room, away from the windows. "How do you know that?" "Because I can see you, Gregory." I spun toward the windows, scanning the tree line with the tower's spotlight. Nothing. Just darkness and wind moving through the branches. "Where are you?" "Location marker J47, I told you. That's 200 yards away. There's no line of sight from there to—" "The shadows are at the base of the stairs now. You should check." I grabbed the handheld spotlight and leaned out the south-facing window, aiming down at the staircase. Empty. Just metal steps and support beams disappearing into the dark below. When I turned back to the radio, the caller was still on the line. I could hear him breathing. "There's nobody there," I said. "Not anymore." The line went dead again. I called it in. This time, Ranger Kellerman and another ranger named Torres drove out to the tower themselves. I watched their headlights wind up the access road, and I met them at the base of the stairs. Kellerman had a flashlight and Torres had his service radio, and we all walked the perimeter of the tower while I explained what happened. "You're sure he said J47? Kellerman asked. "Positive. That's a quarter mile from here. Even with binoculars, he couldn't see into the tower from that angle. Too many trees." Torres checked the area under the stairs, behind the equipment shed, anywhere someone could have hidden. Nothing. No footprints in the soft dirt around the tower base. No sign anyone had been there, except the three of us. "Probably someone with a police scanner," Torres said. "Picked up your info from old dispatch logs and decided to screw with you." It was a reasonable explanation, but it didn't account for the coffee mug. That wasn't public information. That was real-time observation. We went back up to the tower together, and Kellerman sat with me for the next hour while Torres drove the canyon road, checking for anyone with radio equipment. They came up empty. "You want us to pull you off the shift?" Kellerman asked before he left. "We can get someone else up here until we figure this out." I told him no. 23 years of dispatch work. I'd dealt with worse than prank calls. I wasn't going to let some creep with a radio run me off a job. I regretted that decision. The third call came the next night. I was ready for it, had the radio recorder running, had Kellerman on standby at the ranger station. "Gregory Shaw, Tower 7, do you copy?" "I'm here, and I'm recording this. Location marker J47. I need to report that the shadows are inside the tower now." My stomach dropped. I was alone in the room. The door was locked. The windows were all closed except for the north-facing one, which was only open 3 inches for ventilation. "There's nobody in here but me." "Check the corner behind the filing cabinet, the southeast corner." I didn't want to look. God, even now telling this makes my hands shake, but I looked. The filing cabinet was against the southeast wall, and there was a gap between it and the corner, maybe 8 inches wide. Dark. I couldn't see into it without moving closer. "There's nothing there," I said. "Not yet." I backed away from the corner, keeping my eyes on it, and reached for the radio to call Kellerman. "Don't bother," the voice said. "They're already on their way. I can see their headlights on the access road." I moved to the window. He was right. 2 sets of headlights, winding up the hill. "How are you doing this?" "You should ask them to check location marker J47 when they arrive. I think they'll find it interesting." The line went dead. Kellerman and Torres came up the stairs fast, and I was talking before they even got through the door. Told them about the call, the corner, the headlights. Kellerman's face went tight. "We need to check J47, he said. "He specifically said you should." We drove out there together, all 3 of us, leaving the tower empty. The trail marker was a wooden post with faded paint, stuck in the ground at a hairpin turn on the canyon rim. Torres shined his flashlight around it, and that's when we saw the equipment. A radio transceiver, battery-powered, zip-tied to the back of the post. It was set to the emergency frequency. The antenna was pointed toward the tower. But there was no one there. No tent, no campsite, no footprints. Just the radio, broadcasting from an empty location. Kellerman grabbed it, checked the frequency settings. "This thing's been transmitting on a loop. Could have been left here days ago." "Then who's been talking to me?" I asked. Nobody had an answer for that. We took the radio back to the tower. Torres stayed with me for the rest of the shift while Kellerman drove the transceiver to the ranger station to dust it for prints. Nothing came back. The equipment was clean. The calls stopped after that. No more voice on the emergency frequency. No more reports of shadows. But 2 weeks later, I got a package at the ranger station. No return address, just my name on the label. Inside was a photograph of the tower taken from the canyon rim. The angle was wrong for J47. It was too high, too direct. In the photograph, I could see myself through the north-facing window. I was sitting at the desk with the orange mug beside me, exactly where it had been during that second call. The timestamp on the photo was from 3 nights before the call started. I'm a contractor, plumber, mostly residential, but I take whatever pays. Not the kind of guy who believes in curses or bad energy or any of that. Just wanted to say that up front. Last October, I got a call from the Parks Department about a job at Ridgeline Lookout, this old fire tower station about 40 miles outside Prescott. Built in the 30s, abandoned since the 80s. They were trying to restore it as a historical site, but the septic system was shot. Tree roots had cracked the tank, groundwater was seeping in. The whole thing needed to be dug out and replaced. Simple job, good money. 3 days, maybe 4. I drove up on a Tuesday morning. The station sat on this flat outcrop surrounded by ponderosa pines, overlooking a canyon that dropped maybe 300 feet. Beautiful, actually. The kind of isolated spot that should feel peaceful. It didn't. The air up there had this thickness to it, like pressure building before a storm, except the sky was clear. The station itself was small, stone foundation, wooden upper level with windows on all sides for spotting fires. The windows were boarded up, but you could still see the original glass behind the plywood. I parked my truck, unloaded my tools, and started marking out where I'd need to dig. That's when I noticed how quiet it was. I don't mean normal quiet, I mean no birds, no insects, no wind in the trees, just this flat, dead silence that made my ears ring. I actually checked my phone to make sure I hadn't gone deaf or something. The signal was fine, everything was fine, except it wasn't. I started digging around noon, following the old pipes from the foundation to where the septic tank should be. The ground was rocky, tough going. About 3 feet down, my shovel hit something that wasn't rock. Glass, heavy glass. I cleared the dirt away carefully, thinking maybe it was an old bottle or mason jar someone had buried, but it was bigger than that. About the size of a gallon jug sealed with what looked like tar or pitch. The glass was thick, warped, hand-blown, and inside was this black silt, dense, almost solid, and moths. Hundreds of dead moths pressed against the glass, layered so thick I could barely see through them. I pulled it out, set it aside, kept digging, found another one 2 feet over. Same design, same contents. Then another, and another. By the time the sun started dropping, I'd uncovered 11 jars, all placed in a rough circle around the foundation. Not buried randomly. Placed deliberately, evenly spaced, like someone had measured. The silt inside each one was identical. That same thick black substance that didn't look like dirt or mud, more like oil, but it didn't move. And the moths weren't rotted or decayed. They looked freshly dead, perfectly preserved. I should have called my contact at the Parks Department right then. I know that now, but it was getting late, and I figured I'd just move the jars out of the way, finish excavating the septic site, and mention it in my report. Historical artifacts, probably. Let the restoration team deal with it. I loaded the jars into the bed of my truck and went back to digging. That's when the silence changed. It didn't get louder. It got heavier, like the air itself had become denser, pressing down on my eardrums. I stopped, leaned on my shovel, looked around. The shadows under the trees had gotten darker, not because the sun was setting. It was still an hour from dusk, but the shadows themselves looked wrong, thicker, opaque. I told myself I was tired, dehydrated, the altitude was messing with me. Then I heard the wings, not flapping, more like rustling, thousands of wings brushing against each other in the dark. I spun around, searching for the source, but there was nothing. The sound was coming from everywhere and nowhere, from the trees, from the ground, from the air itself. I grabbed my flashlight, clicked it on. The beam barely penetrated 5 feet. The light just stopped, like it was hitting something solid. I swept it across the clearing, and that's when I saw them. Moths, covering every surface of the lookout station. The walls, the boarded windows, the roof. Thousands of them, packed so tightly they looked like a moving carpet. They weren't flying, just sitting there, wings folded, antennae twitching. I backed toward my truck, not taking my eyes off the station. The rustling sound was coming from their wings, all of them vibrating in unison, creating this low, droning hum that I felt in my chest more than heard. I made it to the truck, threw my tools in the back, and climbed into the cab. My hands were shaking so badly I could barely get the key in the ignition. The engine turned over, and I put it in gear, ready to get the hell out of there. That's when I looked at the jars in the truck bed. They were vibrating, all 11 of them, rattling against each other. The black silt inside was moving now, churning, pressing against the glass from the inside. And the moths, the dead moths that had been motionless for God knows how long, their wings were twitching. I don't remember much about the drive down the mountain. I drove fast, too fast, barely staying on the switchbacks. I kept checking the rearview mirror, expecting to see something following me, but there was only darkness. Except the darkness looked wrong. It looked like it was spreading, pooling in the canyon behind me like liquid. I got back to Prescott just after midnight, pulled into a gas station, checked the jars. They'd stopped moving. The silt was still again. The moths were motionless, but when I touched one of the jars, the glass was ice cold, cold enough to burn my hand. I left them at the station, told the attendant they were hazardous materials I was dropping off for disposal. He didn't argue. I don't think he wanted to touch them either. The next morning I called the parks department, told them I couldn't finish the job. Equipment failure, I said. They weren't happy, but they paid me for the day I worked and found another contractor. I drove back up to Ridgeline 2 weeks later. Don't ask me why. I needed to see it in daylight, needed to prove to myself it was just a job site, just an old building in the woods. The new contractor's truck was parked at the edge of the clearing, but there was no sign of him. His tools were scattered around the foundation, the excavation half finished. The station was crawling with moths again, covering every inch of it. I didn't stay long. Here's the thing I can't get past. I've been doing research going through old records at the county library. The lookout station was built in 1934, but the land it sits on, there's no record of what was there before. No indigenous sites, no homesteads, just blank space on every map before the 30s. And when they built the station, they brought in workers from out of state, none of them local. The crew finished the job in 3 weeks, and according to the payroll records, every single one of them left Arizona immediately after. I found one old photograph from the dedication ceremony. The station in the background, maybe a dozen people standing in front of it, and on the ground around the foundation you can just barely make out dark shapes, circular, evenly spaced. The jars were already there when they built it. They built the station around them. I'm a delivery driver, self-employed, mostly rural logistics. I take the jobs other companies won't touch, the ones that require driving 3 hours into nowhere to drop off propane tanks or medical supplies at ranger stations. It's decent money and I like the solitude. I'm not the type who gets rattled easily. 42 years old, seen plenty of weird stuff on back roads at night. Deer with half their faces missing from disease, abandoned cars that have been stripped for parts. Once found a whole campsite just left behind, food still on the table. This was different. I was heading to a fire lookout station about 60 miles north of the main highway. single-lane Forest Service road, no cell signal for the last 40 minutes of the drive. It was around 11 at night. I'd left light because the ranger I was delivering to worked nights and specifically asked me to come after dark so he'd be awake to help unload. About 2 miles from the station, my headlights caught something reflective on a tree trunk. Not animal eyes, wrong color, wrong height. I slowed down. There was a trail camera strapped to a pine tree about 7 feet up, one of those expensive models with the cellular uplink and the black metal housing. Here's the thing. I've seen hundreds of trail cams. Hunters use them, researchers use them, even the Forest Service uses them. They're always pointed at the trail or at a game path or at eye level where you'd catch a person walking. This one was angled straight up at the sky. I stopped the truck. Told myself it was probably just mounted wrong, maybe fell and got repositioned by someone who didn't know what they were doing. But it was strapped on tight, deliberate. New straps, no weathering. And the angle was too specific. 45 degrees, pointed up through the canopy. I got out, I don't know why. Curiosity, maybe, or just the wrongness of it. The camera had an SD card slot on the side, one of those quick release types. I popped it out. Again, I don't know why I thought that was a good idea. Walked back to my truck. I keep a laptop in the cab for routing software. Plugged the card in. 83 photos, all taken over the past 9 days, according to the timestamps. I opened the first one. It was a human eye, just an eye. Extreme close-up, maybe 2 inches from the lens. The iris was brown, the pupil blown wide like someone in complete darkness. But the detail was incredible. I could see individual blood vessels in the sclera, the texture of the iris, even the faint reflection of the camera's infrared sensor in the pupil surface. The photo was taken at 2:47 in the morning. I opened the next one, different eye, blue this time, same extreme close-up, same level of detail, taken at 1:15 in the morning, 3 days prior. I went through all 83. Every single one was an eye, different eyes, different colors, different shapes, some with visible damage like burst blood vessels or scratches on the cornea, all photographed in total darkness with that infrared flash, all taken between midnight and 4 in the morning. My hands were shaking by the time I got to the last photo. I don't know if it was the cold or something else, but I had to set the laptop down on the passenger seat. None of the eyes were looking at the camera. That's what made it worse. They were all unfocused, staring at nothing, like the people were unconscious, or worse. I thought about the angle of the camera, pointed at the sky, and then I thought about how you'd get a photo like that, a close-up of someone's eye in the middle of the night in the middle of the woods. You'd have to be standing over them. You'd have to bring the camera down to their face while they were lying on the ground. The ranger station was still 2 miles ahead. I looked at the road, then back at the tree with the camera still strapped to it. I put the SD card in my pocket. Don't ask me why. Maybe I thought it was evidence. Maybe I just didn't want to leave it there. I drove the rest of the way to the station doing maybe 15 miles an hour, watching the trees on both sides. The ranger, guy named Carl, mid-50s, been doing this for 20 years, met me outside, helped me unload the supplies without much conversation. I almost asked him about the camera. Almost. But when I opened my mouth, what came out was, "You ever have people go missing on this road?" He stopped, holding a box of canned goods. "Why? Just wondering." He looked at me for a long moment. "Sometimes. Hikers, mostly. Get turned around, run out of water. Usually find them within a day or two." He paused. "Had a guy last month we never found. Left his car at the trailhead, never came back." I didn't ask anything else. On the drive back, I stopped where the camera was, or where it should have been. The tree was empty, fresh marks on the bark where the straps had been, but the camera was gone. I'd been at the ranger station maybe 20 minutes. I still have the SD card. I've looked at the photos maybe a dozen times trying to find something I missed. Tried reverse image searching a few, but nothing came up. I thought about going to the police, but what would I even say? I found a camera in the woods with weird photos on it, and now it's gone. Here's what I can't stop thinking about. The level of detail in those photos required a macro lens, professional equipment, and the metadata showed they were all taken with the same camera, same settings. Someone went back to that spot over and over, 9 different nights, and took those pictures. I don't do night deliveries on that route anymore. Told my clients I've got a scheduling conflict. They can find someone else. The SD card is in my glove box. I keep thinking I should destroy it, but I haven't. Sometimes when I'm driving during the day, regular routes, normal deliveries, I catch myself checking my rearview mirror more than I should. Not looking for cars, looking for something else. I don't even know what. I'm an urban planner, early 30s, and my job is about as boring as it sounds. Zoning maps, environmental surveys, public comment sessions. I'm a pretty rational person, for context. I deal in data, not ghost stories. Last month, the city hired me to assess a proposed expansion of Ridgeway Park into adjacent private land. About 40 acres of dense forest that hadn't been surveyed in decades. The landowner had finally agreed to sell, and my job was to document the existing conditions. Tree density, erosion patterns, wildlife corridors, standard stuff. I borrowed a high-resolution mapping drone from a colleague because the canopy was too thick for a proper ground survey. The plan was simple: fly a grid pattern, generate a topographic overlay, file my report. The first 2 days were uneventful. Miles of unbroken forest, the kind of old-growth hardwood you don't see much anymore in our region. Oak, hickory, some tulip poplar. The drone footage came back clean. Healthy canopy, no signs of blight or invasive species. I was actually pleased. It would make a beautiful addition to the park system. On the third pass, I was reviewing footage from a section about 2 miles in when I noticed something off in the imagery. A color shift in the canopy. I zoomed in and the leaves looked normal, but the trunks looked wrong. I tagged the coordinates and flew the drone back for a closer look, dropping it down below the canopy to get a better angle. That's when I saw it. A massive clearing, maybe 300 yards across, where every single tree had been stripped of bark in a perfect horizontal band. Not randomly, not sporadically, every tree. The stripped section ran about 6 feet off the ground, and the precision was what got me first. The edges were so clean they looked machined, but there were no tool marks, no saw teeth, no axe blade scars, just deep, polished grooves carved into the bare wood, running horizontally around each trunk like something had wrapped itself around them and scraped the bark away. The trees were still alive. That was the part that made my stomach drop. The leaves above were green and full. These trees had been damaged recently, weeks maybe, and they were surviving, but the exposed wood had this sick, glistening quality, like exposed muscle. I landed the drone and pulled up the file on my laptop. I went through the footage 3 times, counting. 47 trees in that clearing, every single one marked at exactly the same height. The grooves were deep, too. At least an inch into the wood in some places, spiraling around the trunks in smooth, deliberate curves. I know what you're thinking. Machinery, right? Some logging company doing prep work. But there were no access roads within 5 miles of that section. No tire tracks. No equipment scars in the undergrowth. And the grooves didn't match any tool I'd ever seen. They were too organic, too fluid. I called my supervisor and sent her the footage. She went quiet for a long time after I explained what I was seeing. Then she said, "Owen, don't go out there in person. Just file the report with what you have." But I couldn't. I needed to see it myself. I needed to understand the scale of it because the drone footage didn't convey how wrong it felt. The next morning, I drove out to the access point and hiked in with a GPS unit and a handheld camera. It took me almost 2 hours to reach the coordinates. When I got there, the first thing I noticed was the silence. No birds, no insects, just wind moving through the canopy, and even that sounded muted. The forest around the clearing was dense and healthy, but the moment I crossed into that stripped section, the air felt different, heavier. The trees up close were worse than the footage suggested. The grooves weren't random scratches, they were patterns. Deliberate, interlocking curves that wrapped around each trunk with a precision that made my skin crawl. I reached out and touched one of the stripped sections. The wood was smooth, polished, cold, even in the late morning sun. I started taking measurements. The height was exact, 6 feet, 2 inches on every tree. The width of the stripped band varied slightly, between 8 and 12 inches, but the placement was identical. Whatever did this had moved through the forest systematically, marking each tree with the same methodical care. Then I found the fur. It was caught in one of the grooves near the base of a large oak, coarse, dark gray, almost black in the shadows. I pulled a sample and held it up to the light. The individual strands were thicker than any animal fur I'd ever seen, closer to wire than hair. I bagged it and kept moving. That's when I realized the clearing wasn't circular. It was a path. The marked trees formed a corridor through the forest, wide enough for something massive to move through without disturbing the undergrowth on either side. I followed it for maybe 200 yards, and the markings continued. Every tree, same height, same deliberate grooves. At the end of the corridor, the pattern stopped, just ended. The last tree was marked like the others, but beyond it, the forest was untouched. No trail, no disturbed ground. Whatever made this had either stopped here or simply vanished into the dense woods beyond. I checked the ground for prints. Nothing. The forest floor was thick with leaf litter, but there were no depressions, no weight marks. Something large enough to strip bark off 47 trees at 6 feet high should have left a trench in the ground. But there was nothing. I tried to rationalize it on the hike back. Maybe a piece of heavy equipment had been airlifted in for some reason. Maybe it was an art installation, some guerrilla environmental statement. But none of that explained the grooves. None of that explained the precision. And nothing explained why there was no evidence of human presence anywhere in that section of forest. I submitted my report with the footage and the fur sample. I recommended the expansion be delayed pending further investigation. The city's wildlife management team went out a week later with their own equipment. They found the clearing exactly where I said it would be. But here's the thing. They measured the height of the stripped bark at 6 feet, 8 inches. Not 6'2". I argued with them. I showed them my notes, my photos. They said I must have made an error. But I didn't. I'm certain of that, which means whatever made those marks came back while I was gone and adjusted its work, raised the pattern 6 inches higher on every single tree. And I don't know what that means. I don't know if it was correcting a mistake or if it's still out there, still marking, still claiming that section of forest with a precision that suggests it knows exactly what it's doing. The expansion was approved last week. They're breaking ground next month. I asked my supervisor if anyone would be monitoring the site during construction. She said there was no budget for it. I haven't been back. I won't be going back. I'm a park ranger, 44 years old, been with the Wildlife Division for 16 years now. I'm telling you this because what I'm about to describe isn't something I would have believed coming from someone else. Last September, we got reports of cougar activity in the Cascade Ridge area. Nothing unusual, just hikers spotting tracks, hearing calls at night. Standard protocol meant setting up trail cameras to document movement patterns, maybe get a population estimate. I've done this dozens of times. You hike out to remote areas, mount cameras on trees about chest height, angle them toward game trails, and wait. The cameras are motion activated. When something moves past, they trigger and record for 30 seconds. I set up 6 cameras over a 2-day period, all along a 15-mile stretch of backcountry where the sightings had been concentrated. These weren't maintained trails, just deer paths and dry creek beds cutting through dense Douglas fir. The kind of terrain where you don't expect to see people because there's no reason for people to be there. No scenic overlooks, no water features, just wilderness. I checked the cameras 2 weeks later. That's the usual interval. Enough time to capture behavioral patterns without disturbing the area too frequently. The first 4 cameras showed exactly what I expected. Deer mostly, a black bear, raccoons. 1 camera caught a bobcat, which was actually exciting because we don't see them often in that elevation. The 5th camera was different. The first anomaly clip was time-stamped 3:07 in the morning, dated September 19th. The footage showed a woman walking directly toward the camera on what wasn't even really a path, just a gap between trees. She was elderly, maybe late 60s or early 70s, wearing street clothes. Dark slacks, a cardigan. Regular walking shoes, not hiking boots. Her hair was short and gray, and she moved at a steady pace. Not fast, but not slow either. She didn't look at the camera, didn't pause, just walked through the frame in about 8 seconds and disappeared into the darkness beyond the infrared range. I assumed she was a lost hiker. It happens. People underestimate distances, take wrong turns, end up miles from where they intended. But the timestamp bothered me. 3:07 in the morning is a strange time to be walking, even if you're lost. And her clothes were wrong. Nobody hikes in slacks and a cardigan. I kept scrolling through the footage. The next clip from that camera was dated September 20th, 3:07 in the morning. Same woman, same clothes, same steady pace, same direction. She walked through the frame in almost exactly the same spot, like she was following an invisible line only she could see. September 21st, 3:07 in the morning. Same thing. September 22nd, September 23rd. Every single day she appeared at precisely 3:07 in the morning, walking the same route. I sat in my truck going through 2 weeks of footage, and she was there every single night. 14 consecutive appearances, all at 3:07 in the morning, always alone, always wearing the same outfit. The camera captured her from the same angle each time because she walked the exact same path. Not approximately the same, but identical, like she was tracing the same line over and over. Here's what made my hands start shaking as I watched. During that 2-week period, we'd had 3 significant rainstorms. I'd hiked out in the aftermath of one of them, slogging through mud, getting drenched by water still dripping from branches. In the footage from those nights, the ground was visibly wet. You could see the sheen of moisture on leaves in the infrared, but she was completely dry. Her hair wasn't wet. Her clothes weren't soaked or even damp looking. She just walked through like the rain didn't exist. I reported it to my supervisor, showed him the footage. He watched maybe 5 clips before he said what I'd already been thinking. We needed to check missing person reports, see if anyone matching her description had been reported lost in the area. But there was nothing. No reports from that region in the past 6 months. No elderly women. Nobody. We discussed searching for her, but where do you even start? The forest in that area covers hundreds of square miles. She could be anywhere during the day. The only thing we knew for certain was that she'd be at that specific spot at 3:07 in the morning, and my supervisor wasn't about to authorize a nighttime search operation based on trail camera footage. His exact words were, "She's obviously alive and mobile. If she wanted help, she'd signal the camera or leave some kind of marker." I moved one of the other cameras, repositioned it about a quarter mile down the path she seemed to be following. I wanted to see if she continued in that direction or if she looped back somehow. I checked it a week later. She appeared on that camera too, same time, 3:07 in the morning. But here's what changed. She was walking the opposite direction, not back toward the original camera, but continuing on the same path as if the path was circular, a loop. I tried to map it in my head. If she was walking a continuous loop and passing fixed points at exactly 3:07 in the morning every night, that meant she was maintaining a precise pace over unknown terrain in complete darkness. No flashlight, I would have seen it in the footage. No headlamp, just walking. The loop theory made me realize something else. I calculated roughly how long it would take to walk between the two camera points at her pace. About 4 hours. If she passed the first camera at 3:07 in the morning and was walking a loop, she'd complete it and pass the same camera again around 7 o'clock in the morning. I checked. There was no footage of her returning. She passed once per night at 3:07 in the morning, and then she was gone until the next night at the exact same time. That's when I started thinking about migration patterns, about how animals follow routes with precision that seems almost mechanical. Salmon returning to spawn, birds flying thousands of miles to the same nesting sites, deer using the same trails for generations, but those are instincts, biological imperatives. This was a person. I went back out there in late October. I wanted to see the area in daylight, try to understand what she might be doing. The path she followed wasn't a path at all, just a route through the forest that happened to be relatively clear of undergrowth. There were no signs of habitation, no campsite, no shelter, nothing. I walked what I estimated to be her route for about 2 miles before I had to turn back. It was just forest. Dense, unremarkable forest. I thought about leaving a note on the camera, something like, "Are you okay? Do you need help?" But that felt intrusive somehow, and also pointless. She never looked at the camera. It was as if she couldn't see it, or didn't care. The footage continued through November, every single night at 3:07 in the morning. I stopped checking it regularly. What was the point? She was going to be there, doing the same thing, and I had no explanation. My supervisor stopped asking about it. It became this strange, filed-away thing that nobody wanted to discuss because discussing it meant acknowledging how deeply wrong it was. December brought snow, heavy snow, the kind that makes backcountry travel dangerous and shuts down most of the park to recreational access. I assumed the footage would stop. Nobody could maintain that kind of routine in those conditions. She was still there, walking through 6 inches of fresh snow at 3:07 in the morning. I could see her breath in the cold air, but she wore the same cardigan, same slacks, no winter coat, no gloves. The snow wasn't even disturbed behind her in the frame. By the time the camera's 30-second recording ended, her footprints had already started filling in with fresh snowfall. I haven't checked the cameras in 3 weeks. They're still out there. She's probably still walking. What keeps me awake now isn't fear exactly, it's the wrongness of it. The human mind isn't built for that kind of regularity. We're not supposed to be that consistent. We get tired, we get sick, we make mistakes, we change. But she doesn't change. She just walks every night at 3:07 in the morning, following a route that doesn't go anywhere, wearing clothes that should have rotted off her body by now. I keep thinking about those cameras, still recording, still capturing her every single night. I'm going to tell you something I've been trying to rationalize for 6 months now, and I still can't make sense of it. I'm a handyman, been doing it for about 8 years. I take whatever jobs come my way, mostly residential stuff. But last April I got hired by the County Parks Department to refresh one of their old picnic pavilions out near Kettle Lake. It was a straightforward gig: repaint the interior, patch some cracks, replace a few light fixtures. The pavilion itself was built in the 30s, all stone and concrete, mainly rented out for family reunions and company picnics. I had the place to myself for a full week since they'd blocked off reservations during the work. I showed up on a Monday morning with my tools and paint, and the first thing I noticed when I walked in was the smell. It wasn't strong, just noticeable, like old leather mixed with something sharp, almost metallic, ozone maybe, like right before a thunderstorm. I figured it was just the pavilion being closed up all winter, so I propped the doors open and got to work. The smell didn't really fade, though. Even with the cross breeze going, it hung in the air, concentrated near the back corner where the main support wall met the floor. I'm not the type to get distracted by weird smells. I've worked in crawl spaces and old barns, but this one kept pulling my attention. By the end of that first day, I'd painted most of the ceiling and was down on my knees patching hairline cracks in the concrete foundation when I found the one in that back corner. It was narrow, maybe a 1/4 inch wide, running horizontal about 6 inches above the floor. I was scraping it out to prep it for sealant when my putty knife went in deeper than it should have. I stopped and looked closer. The crack wasn't just a surface fracture. It opened into something. I grabbed my flashlight and angled it in, and what I saw made me pause. There was a cavity back there, not a natural void or a gap from settling. This was smooth, deliberate. It ran horizontally into the wall, maybe 8 or 9 inches deep before the light just stopped hitting anything. I tapped the concrete next to it with the handle of my knife and it sounded solid. Tapped the crack itself and it echoed faintly, like there was empty space behind it. I know what you're thinking. Old buildings have weird construction quirks all the time. That's what I told myself. Maybe they'd run conduit through there decades ago and sealed it over. Maybe it was a drainage feature that never got finished. But the smell was stronger there, right at the opening, and when I leaned in close, I swear I felt air moving. Not a draft from outside. This was coming from inside the wall, like something was breathing it out. I should have just sealed it and moved on, but I sat there for a minute shining my light into that gap, trying to see further back. The walls of the cavity were too smooth, not rough like broken concrete or chiseled stone. Smooth, like they'd been poured or molded. And the angle was wrong. It didn't follow the natural lines of the foundation. It cut across them. I finally got up and mixed a batch of sealant, filled the crack and smoothed it over. By then it was getting dark outside, so I cleaned up my tools, checked that the paint cans were sealed and locked up. I didn't think much of it on the drive home, but that night I kept seeing that smooth cavity in my head, the way the light just disappeared into it. The next morning when I came back, the smell was gone. I noticed it immediately when I walked in. The air was just normal, a little stale maybe, but no trace of that leather and ozone odor. I figured I'd finally aired the place out, so I went to check my work from the day before. The ceiling paint had dried clean. The cracks I'd patched looked fine. And the one in the back corner, the one with the cavity, was perfectly sealed. Too perfectly. The sealant I'd applied was the standard gray concrete patch, the kind that takes at least 12 hours to fully cure and always leaves a slightly rough texture. What I was looking at was smooth, flush with the wall, and a shade lighter than what I'd used. I crouched down and ran my hand over it. It was cold, even though the pavilion had warmed up in the morning sun. And it was hard. Not cured concrete hard, but something denser. I pressed my thumb against it and couldn't leave a mark. I stood up and checked the rest of my work. Everything else looked exactly like I'd left it. Same tools in the same spots, same paint trays with the same dried edges. But that one patch had been redone. I spent the rest of that day trying to focus on painting the walls, but I kept glancing back at that corner. At lunchtime, I walked the perimeter outside, looking for any sign someone had been there overnight. Tire tracks, footprints, anything. The gravel parking lot was empty except for my truck. No other vehicles had been there since I'd left. Here's the thing. I'm not the type to believe in weird stuff. I don't watch ghost shows or read creepy stories online. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off, so I decided to document what I was seeing. I pulled out my phone and took a picture of the sealed crack. Then I checked my photos from the day before, the ones I'd taken to log my progress for the county. I scrolled to the shot I'd taken of that back corner before I'd started patching. The crack wasn't in the photo. I mean, the wall was there, the same section of foundation, but the surface was smooth. No crack, no gap. I checked the metadata. It was definitely from the day before, same timestamp as the other progress photos. But the crack I'd spent 20 minutes sealing wasn't visible. I went back to the corner and crouched down again, running my fingers over the patch. My hand stopped on something small and metallic, barely protruding from the surface. I worked it loose with my knife. It took some effort, like it was set deep, and when it came free, I almost dropped it. It was a piece of my house key, not a copy, not something similar. My actual key, or part of it. I recognized the cut pattern on the teeth, the specific wear on the edge from where I'd filed it down last year when it started sticking in my lock. It was sheared off clean, just the tip, maybe a 1/4 inch long. I had my keys in my pocket. I pulled them out and checked. My house key was intact, no damage, no missing piece. I held the fragment next to it anyway, and the cuts matched perfectly. Same key, same marks, but mine was whole. My hand started shaking then, not from fear exactly, but from the wrongness of it. I put the fragment in my pocket and stood up, and that's when I noticed the smell was back. Faint, but definitely there. Old leather and ozone, coming from the sealed crack. I didn't finish the job. I packed up my tools, told the county I'd had a family emergency and haven't been back. They paid me for the 2 days and hired someone else to complete it. I still have that key fragment in a drawer at home. Sometimes I take it out and hold it next to my key just to make sure I didn't imagine the match. The thing I can't stop thinking about isn't the cavity or the smell or even the impossible patch job. It's the air I felt moving through that crack, the way it came from inside the wall, steady and rhythmic, like something back there was breathing. And the fact that when I sealed it, something sealed it again, better than I could have, and left me a piece of myself I shouldn't have lost. I don't know what was in that wall, but whatever it was, it knew I'd been there, and it wanted me to know it could reach me.